Yo, welcome back. This is the Edgimaer follow-up piece. I want to be able to fill in the blanks of like how they came with acquiring the other intelligent species that are on Edgimaer that aren't Wisp and all this other kind of stuff. Like what they started from the jump and how they got the 8124 in the current world they're connected with and things like that. But hopefully this close any gaps that I missed in the other video. Otherwise, it would have been 2 hours because I would have had everything in there. I feel like everything I'm about to tell you is everything else you need to know about Edgimaer. Now, with world building, there are tons of subjects to address. For instance, Edgimaer access is limited by a specific buy-in. It costs $1 million for a lifetime pass, and that's the only option. Whichever guild you are aligned under, that money will be donated to them. Hero, warrior, or villain. As stated in a bunch of characters' makeup, they did what they had to do to get access to Edgimaer, because once you do, the likelihood of you becoming powerful jumps to 100%. The Four Moons don't mind who gets access to Edgimaer because they are invulnerable. Invulnerably peaceful. That invulnerability started with a simple conversation between the Four Moons. In universe, say Kaneshi Vog, a universe simply meant to create omniscient Wisp. They know who their creators are and know why they were created. These Four Moons were created at different times, a good 1,000 years apart, but blue and yellow were made at the same time. They were all created in different segments of their universe, more than 20 zillion miles away from each other. The omniscience they were given was at a 100% capacity, simply for the point of creating more universes. The experiment that created them had the idea of peacefully powerful worlds to be. They were given thought kits that would drive them in a direction of party hardy. As seen in the thumbnail, they are emoting cool, anger, surprise, and excitement. Upon meeting, they had a conversation about what kind of worlds they are going to make. A long, hearty conversation about everything they knew, which was, and still is everything, but making the world specific to their core values. Party hardy. All four of them agreed that they would make a world on the edge of Marinus. When it was settled, they finally left Universe Say Kaneshi Vog to spark a big bang to create their first universe. Universe Edgimaer. Individually, all of them had the thought of a single sun, single planet, single galaxy universe. They are set to orbit planet Edgimaer for eternity as 4 moons to a gigantic magical planet. The initial setup of planet Edgimaer had it looking like a polka-dotted lands of a planet. None of the continents touched each other at first. All of the continents had vegetation and climates that would circulate several atmospheres specific for Wisp to survive in. When they created their first set of Wispity, they created 4, all males, to be disciples of preparing the direction of Wispity. Creating love out of nothing at all is a rather fascinating thing. It's like clearing the head of intrusive thoughts to force your mind to focus on what's really good out here in these streets, meadows, metropolises, aircraft, airlands, and dimension. It's a wonderful thing when you can just simply do that. The 4 originals were given magical might to go on out there and be somebody. After being told what night versus day is, all basic things needed for them to survive was that big bright thing in the sky, how they will appear in the sky, and the concept of gender equality, how it must be upheld and how there will be no naysaying towards it. That explanation gave them a lot of information they would have to come back to every now and then, which happened a lot. Because like the unknown, they have questions, but they were jovial about it. Gave the 4 males 4 women to understand how procreation works. It took them a good 30 years to understand everything. 30 human years to be clear. That's a lot of time, right? Right. The moons gave them everything, truthfully, for the sprouting of wisp kind. The first 8 wisps started on one continent and civilized it up. After queendoms and kingdoms finally started to develop, on one continent, exploration began. Exploration led to a lot of magical might being developed, with everyone getting along at the beginning of time. There were a few qualms to deal with outside of monsters. Their first universe was shaping up to be lovely by the actual year of 36. They were ready to be addressed at the same time across the entire planet. By this time, they have manned 3 of the continents. Yes, light moves fast. Blue, green, yellow, and red had a long, grab some food and drinks dialogue prepared for them. We're telling them exactly how they want Edgimaer to be. They were given a whole way of life, designed by 4 guys that proved their godism. Because they proved that they are gods, their Wispity had no choice but to believe them. By the end of that long hour of dialogue to the population of Edgimaer, they were all hoping they would be able to get a request. All of it was light at heart, but there were some lines drawn, with the population being at different longitudes and latitudes, over different terrains, with different views of vegetation, dirt, and water. They all thought different. That's what they wanted. That's when the beginning of peace was challenged. That's when Edgimaer really turned into Edgimaer. All of the wisps asked various requests. There were some that wanted the same power as them. There were some that wanted individual powers, and a handful that wanted to live forever. After discussing all of the requests in a matter of seconds, 99% of them were granted. The 1% that didn't get their request answered developed ill will towards the entirety of Wisp. Unfortunate for them, they didn't request in a respectful way, so they were told individually that because they didn't understand the word sacrifice, they are going to be shown by being sacrificed. When Wisp learned that the moons adhered to sacrifices, over many years of being made examples, they had choices to make. While all of them being granted a completely random blessing of powers, they learned which powers worked the best against others. War. Queens and kings started knocking out Problem Wisp in the name of receiving more power. Thus the way of life in Edgimaer began. Different sacrifices of overpowered monsters changed the course of Wisp as well. Yet, year 1607 was around the corner, and on that new year, somebody made a sacrifice of a good chunk of Wisp. Then they asked about other dimensions that made the moons think. Real hard, real long. This wasn't a quick think for them. They traveled to other universes often to see what other powers are out there. They never thought about connecting Edgimaer to another universe until a lady had 45 warlords yeeted at the same time. Her request was a lovely one. The moons love it when their kind asks them for an audience. They never read the minds of their kind. Just wanted to point that out real quick. They would rather be surprised by their kind than know exactly everything that's going on at once. Basking in their ambience had her tore up as she discovered how comedic they are. Regardless of their omniscience, they had an extremely fucked up way of telling her she is their first immortal. Then had an even more extremely fucked up way of telling her she will be Edgimaer's first historian. With her being able to get 45 titans of mass destruction hemmed up at the same time, in the name of a personal sacrifice, it would be easy for her to notate the happenings around the planet. They taught her what she did was art. The writing she did in order to make the sacrifice happen would make you never want to step foot in Edgimaer. The delicious lies she told to make the world a better place was wild. Being their first favorite was wild. She made history. She was on their team when deciding the first universe to connect to. She helped with making their first bylaws. The Miyazi-Richiti plan is what they call it. Still kept it, even after she moved on to her next lifetime. Those bylaws cemented Edgimaer's way of life for zillions of years, making the moons forever thankful for providing them entertainment. It was a woman's touch that brought up a zillion new lives, that brought upon 23 completely different intelligent life forms to Edgimaer, in no particular order. Angels, centaurs, devils, dragonborns, Ikruzo, elves, fairies, golems, Gwaits, Kyojins, mag people, mare people, Nervantos, Nisharan, octopi, orcs, shadows, stars, Terislos, Varonas, Woodians, Waitriti, and the last intelligent life forms they have connected with, humans. The Wisp allows all of these species to live in Edgimaer, for the most part, There are millions of them that live in a plethora of terrains, ranging from the depths of the oceans to the depths of Earth and elevated areas. Majority of them still look like their normal selves. Mostly centaurs, Kyojins, dragonborns, octopi, orcs, stars, varunas, golems, and elves. Retain their original forms while the other ones fall under the wisp culture. Whenever any of the non-humanoid natives of Edgimaer leave, they are forced into a human vessel. They safely return to normal once they get back to Edgimaer. In previous connections, that bylaw was the same, from one intelligent species to the next. Throughout all of the connections, several wisps that gained immortality will go on a thing called the Journey, where they will venture through the universe they are connected to before universe hopping like Rakoto does nowadays. Doing this gives them an initial culture shock that will prepare them for venturing through unknown universes. Before Edgimaer announces their connections, they have historians take Edgimaer specific totems to place them in the worlds. This bylaw tests the level of intelligence of said universe. In a lot of cases, when the supernatural is exposed to the non-supernatural, it takes them 1,000 years before figuring out the science fiction behind those totems. During those years, historians will more than likely procreate with the species to speed up the science fiction know-how behind their totems. As mentioned before, Wisp will befriend anyone that has a similar inner light as them. In other words, the friendliness behind the following stems from the similar inner light. Avosia and Crunch, Nexon and Crunch, Masterpiece and Lux Devo, Rego Racilios and Tokyo Diva, Rakoto and Vire, Crave and Drama, Roughhead and Sorsworn for Echoes, Oranhe and Indianapolis Jones, Zooms and Old Milagroso, Crater and Nightmare, Isisham Noso and Scaros, Silver and Cuerva. When they first met, the Wisp locked in on what looked like a mirror at first, then proceeded to see them as humans. Regardless of any of them being Edgimaer royalty, that still doesn't allow them to step foot on either of the moons, even if they were made into guides. They still wouldn't be able to. The surface of the moons are for natively born Edgimites. Only half-breeds to full breeds can step foot on their actual surface. I don't want to go too far into all of the bylaws, but those are the major ones. And as stated in the video summary of before, Edgimaer is 1.9 times larger than planet Jupiter. As of year 8124, there are 10 nations on Edgimaer. 10 nations are the average throughout the 23 connections. There are no nations on each moon. The moons appear as the moon of Earth Zero to all of mankind. The moons appear as Earth Zero like planets to Edgimites. The moons have entire civilizations on them that act like peaceful and single nations of each. The rotations around Edgimaer are double, moves in 2 different directions. Their directions change at will with no set pattern through their zillions of years of existence. Edgimaer is the same distance away from their sun like all habitable planets of the real world. Earth Zero. The moons rotate Edgimaer once, one full rotation of a human's year. Edgimaer moves around his sun once a human's year. Edgimaer's days are similar to a week. Daytime for 3.5 days and nighttime for 3.5 days. Big planet. Lastly, I'll be telling you about the major order of connections. Blue, green, red, and yellow Big Bangs this universe into reality. The moons create their first 4 wisp. The education of their first wisp is complete by year 36. Edgimaer historians began to record history. The Miyazi Richiti plan is ordained. Then they connected to octopi furs. The moons stopped their method of keeping time once they connect to another universe. When done with the universe, they will pick up where they left off. Once they disconnected from the octopi universe, the moons accepted 700,000 of them before their species was officially placed under the endangered status. The moons make that number the limit for the future. Then, an eon of time, Connections to orcs, elves, fairies, angels, and devils, separately and in their order. They called this connection Ophad, Oefad, to go with the order in which they connected to these universes. Then there's another eon of time. Connections to Woodians, shadows, dragonborns, centaurs, and merpeople, separately and in their order. They were called Wawer. And then a few eons of time, not one or two, three. Connections to golems, then an eon of time. Connection to Kyojins, then an eon of time. Connection to mag people, then an eon of time. Connection to stars, then a few eons of time. Connections to Ekruzo, Gwaits, Nisharan, Waitradi, Terraslos, and Nervantos, separately and in their order, called Enevi. Then a handful of eons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then they connect to Varunas. And then it's 10 eons of time before they connect to the humans. After 4,000 years, humans are considered the perfect connection. With how they figured out immortality for their species, they were put under the status of survival of the fittest. Humans have extracted specific DNA RNA from several species and mythical creatures, spliced their DNA RNA correctly with all humans. All humans are at least 76% human. With the plasma-bound vaccine, humans can survive the test of time. With the longevity of this connection, Edgimaer learned about space travel for lesser beings and fell in love with that aspect. Humans have by far entertained them the most. Throughout all of that time, Edgimaer's entire planet has changed 14 times. Most of those changes were outside of any connections. There's usually 10 nations around the planet. That's the average. The moon started allowing inhabitants to live on them during their first connection. Anyone living on the moons lives a life devoted to making sure Edgimaer keeps its power. Not strengthening it, but keeping it. Majority of them tend to the 12 grand temples on their surface, all spread out in the same pattern. They have other jobs like tending to one another, but the main job is tending to the temples. That's where they learn what the moons are capable of. That's where they develop their lust for journeys. The moons raises their people to be universal, whether they stay there or not. Because deep down and all around, the moons will live forever. They want what they create to last forever. Their people, they want to survive the test of time, because their origin conversation was one for everybody. Their origin conversation predicted nothing. They all wanted 4 individual worlds, but decided to put all of their worlds together. Let's end it on their thought kits. Bro Triagro, to think about everything individually, but collectively, forever at the same time. Ono Motorizuri, we should make something beautiful. Rizu Gugoyer, exploration, adventure, tales, fables, distance, and protection. Jacques Liotiors, whatever is out there, I'm going to find it. As your mind absorbs this information, think about 4 entities deciding to choose each other for a group project. Now think about how they are still working on their first group project. TPB out. Baba Booey.